Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. Today is July 31st, 2019. My name is Alondra Cano, and I'm the chair of the committee. I am joined by council members Steve Fletcher, who's the vice chair of our committee, Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison, Councilmember Lene Palmisano, and we are a quorum of the committee and therefore can conduct the official business of today's agenda. We will be joined by our other two committee members who are on their way. And we are also joined by some guests today. We have Councilmember Jeremy Schrader and Council President Lisa Bender. So with that, we have, let's see here, 8 items on our agenda today, and our first item is receiving and filing our public comment from our community members who have shown up today. We also have a few items under the consent agenda, and we have one final item for discussion, which is a presentation by our Minneapolis Police Department's leadership on vision and culture change within the department. So let's go ahead and start with our public comment. So I see here that we have a few folks that are signed up, and we will be only doing 30 minutes of public comment today to make up for the 1.5 hours that we did last time. And mostly it's because we want to make sure that elected officials have enough time to have a good conversation with our MPD leadership on the changes that we have been doing as a city and with our police department to improve accountability and transparency. So with that, we will ask folks to stick to a 2-minute time frame when they come forward and speak. I'll go ahead and call your name and just come up to the dais and, or I'm sorry, to the microphone and address the committee. So first in line, we have Mr. Chuck Turchik, followed by Deb Moses.
Madam Chair, committee members, Chuck Turchik, 2112 Portland. At the May 12, 2019 meeting of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, Commission Vice Chair Laura Westphal reported that the previous week she had asked MPD Deputy Chief Halverson what had come out of the OJP implementation committees. I now read from the minutes of that meeting, quote, Commissioner Westphal reported that the Deputy Chief Halverson confirmed the police department has not abandoned this project. He agrees and admits they are behind on getting it properly organized and keeping the PCOC updated. He promised Commissioner Westphal, and he took notes, that he would get back to her, unquote. 2 days ago, I wrote Commissioner Westphal asking if she had heard back yet from the Deputy Chief, and she replied that she had not. When I had asked her that same question in person in June, she sort of scoffed and rolled her eyes as if to say, don't be silly. On July 9th, John Elder, the MPD's public information officer, told me that Chief Arredondo had confirmed to him that very day that the recommendations that had come out of the OJP subcommittees were in fact the OJP steering committee's recommendations as well. That's impossible. The MPD didn't have the recommendations that came out of one of the committees, and it didn't have until November of last year the recommendations that came out of another committee. You might think I'm simply going to go away. That ain't going to happen. You might think I'm 72 years old and maybe I'll die soon. I'll pass on that morbid thought. You might wait to ask about implementation of these federally recommended accountability procedures until there's another tragic incident. That would be deplorable. So would one of you please today ask Chief Arredondo, after he gives his presentation, what in the heck happened or is happening with those OJP implementation recommendations? Would you also please ask, how could the OJP steering committee have approved recommendations that came out of 2 of the OJP subcommittees when the MPD didn't have anything that came out of one of those subcommittees until November 2018 and still doesn't have anything that came out of the second of those subcommittees? Thank you very much, and I'll probably be back.
Deb Moses, followed by Ambrose Russell.
Hi, I'm here. I'm Deb Moses. I am a Southside resident and the executive director of House of Charity. I'm here just to talk about the community engagement team's relationship with us at House of Charity. They come in regularly, they volunteer, and many of us, both on staff and our community, always have a lot of concerns and problems with the police and how that relationship works. As you know, we serve a community lunch 365 days a year. As executive director, I am committed that lunch never feels like something that is policed or something that we will not have security in there. We want it to feel like a community. We want it to feel like a home where people can come in and have that relief. And having the community engagement team there, I believe, has done a great deal to both strengthen relationships between the community we serve as well as our staff in making all of us safer and better. And then they've worked hard to really engage with our staff. They even joined our chili contest, but I will say I beat them at that. So they came in number 2, I came in number 1, and they brought people to stack the deck with their votes. But I just really want to say that it's been a positive experience for us, and we hope to see more community engagement throughout our community from the police force rather than some of the more aggressive policing that we see at other times.
Mr. Ambrose Russell, followed by Zoana Martinez.
Good morning to you all. My name is Ambrose Russell. I'm the founder and the chairman of the Inner Hero organization. Our mission is to help develop youth and young adults to become more productive citizens and also bring educational activities to our local officials through the community. We have a partnership with so many police departments within the Twin Cities. But to start off all, it started with the Minneapolis PD. Today I'm here to just speak on part of the work and the great initiative we have done and the improvement we have accomplished within the community. I'm a father of 7, and I've seen the importance with the police and sometimes just how important it is to have that relationship with the police. But most of all, I'm here to talk about, to first of all, thank the police departments for all the work they have done. And if it had not been for the police, I don't know where our daily lives would have been. But despite the unforeseen circumstances that we face at times, I believe as a father of 7, again, I understand family comes first, but the police put the community before anything in their lives. And I believe racking up thousands of hours, man hours rather. With that being said, they do more help and they do need new recruits. So on this note, I'll ask that the board or the chamber agree to extend the numbers for the new recruit. One of the most important reasons I believe we need more officers is to be able to work just within the 8-hour shift to keep them being more proactive to help avoid some of these negative incidents within the communities. Statistically, it has been proven that tiredness leads to poor performance and irrational behavior and decision making. I will ask that you give Chief Rano the opportunity to have more officers because I believe what it will bring, better homes, better cities, better schools, better communities, and hopefully it will lead to a better nation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Zoana Martinez, followed by Lisa Clemens.
Good morning, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Zoana Martinez. I work with the Lake Street Council as the business association for all of Lake Street. We've been working diligently on safety initiatives for probably the last 5 years in the Midtown area of Lake Street, which we consider from Hiawatha to 35W. But more recently, we've been hearing a lot from entrepreneurs in the Uptown area, which is more relevant now than I would say in years past. We also are working diligently with neighbors in the area because they a lot of times are experiencing the same things that our entrepreneurs are facing. We hear frequently that 911 calls don't come in a timely fashion, so that our entrepreneurs are no longer calling 911 like they used to. Our businesses are feeling burnt out regarding safety, and so they're kind of giving up at this point of time. They do lean on their relationships with beat officers that they've made, which has really helped some of our entrepreneurs from meetings that we've put in place that The inspector in our 3rd precinct has brought those beat officers to, or just the outreach that beat officers have done it previously. Beat officers are hard though sometimes because the turnover happens and then those relationships kind of end. At this point of time, we're really, in support of Chief Arredondo's budget requests. Our community needs it. Our businesses are, really facing hardships right now, and we hear it day to day how impactful just safety is to their livelihood. They hear it from, their customers daily. Some of them, we don't know what their future holds on Lake Street. And so we don't want to see vacant storefronts. So we really ask and request that you, prioritize this in the budget. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Lisa Clements, followed by Beth Holzer.
She's going to hand you some papers. I'm here today to speak against the push for ABLE squads in Minneapolis. I worked 13 years in the Minneapolis Police Department, many of which in the North Side area, and most of that time I worked as an ABLE car. I listed a lot of incidents on the paperwork that you have to show you how fast a simple call turns into a priority. Officer needs help. I worked proudly as a Minneapolis police officer for 13 years. I can remember every incident when I needed help because I was an ABLE car. And I'm sure many cops can tell you the same stories. Just responding to a simple alarm call can turn into a burglary in progress, or you need backup there and you need them there immediately. People in the council members cite surveys from officers in other states, Texas being the one I heard, but Texas is not Minneapolis. We have to stop believing policing is a one-size-fits-all states model. I would suggest for once that the Minneapolis City Council and the mayor survey the officers in your very own city and give them a voice as you make change in the police department. What could it hurt? You have a chief for a reason, and I stand with Chief Arredondo, and he is the reason that I come down here and fight back, because I know where his passion is. You need more cops on the street because the people in Minneapolis have a right to have their calls for service answered and in a timely manner. As a mother's love, I understand why other groups working with the police are afraid to come here and express the greatness in those relationships and the need to make them stronger. Many don't come because it's not popular with many on the council, and many that are working with the police are afraid that they'll lose their funds if they come up here and speak. These are the conversations that I have with people in other organizations, but I have to care about the big picture and not the dollars. Community groups cannot be seen as the alternative to police. We have to be seen as the people working with the police for a healthier Minneapolis, as organizations that build trust on both sides. Can I just say, this is tiring to have to keep coming down here to watch you rake cops over the coals publicly and diminish the power of your police chief. I've never seen it done before, and especially on this level. I will be glad when we can just all do the work and keep the community safe. The police safety and the community safety matters to me.
Thank you, Ms. Clemens. Beth Holzer, followed by Dr. Foster.
Hi. Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the council, for the opportunity today to speak in support of Chief Arredondo's proposal and vision for the MPD. My name is Beth Holger, and I'm here as a resident of the city and also as the CEO of The Link, which is a youth and adult-led nonprofit based on the North Side. The Link provides emergency shelter, housing, and supportive services for youth and young families who've experienced sex trafficking and/or homelessness, as well as juvenile justice alternative programs. We are on the front lines of a lot of crisis in the community and do see many of the MPD officers doing very hard work on the front lines too, including but not limited to looking for and finding youth that go missing. They arrest sex traffickers who are victimizing our community's youth and partner with us on that. They drop off youth within our juvenile supervision center so that we can work with them on the underlying reasons that they're engaging in juvenile crime instead of bringing them to the detention center. And we're also fortunate to be partners with the community engagement team who provide essential support for our community, especially on the north side where they are responding to crises, building relationships, and helping youth and many adults who are struggling with poverty and other hardships get access to the very basic things that they need. I believe that the chief's proposal would further the positive work that's being done, along with improving some of the things that just can't be done without further staffing. Things like that have already been mentioned, like reducing wait times for 911 calls, working in a more timely way on sex crime investigations, and continuing to build relationships with the community and reduce the gun violence that's quite honestly killing some of the youth that we know and adults we know in this community. Thank you for your time and for your leadership for the city. I appreciate it.
Dr. Foster, followed by Emily Collins.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the community engagement. I am the Education Director at Hospitality House Youth Development, and over the past few years, we've had officers to come in who have changed the perspective of our students and our children on the north side of how they see the police officers. It has been just a phenomenal impact. What they do is come in for about an hour and they help our students with completing homework. They also help them build skills in reading and writing, and they spend some time in the gym playing with them. It has been a phenomenal impact on our children and some of their family members. So it changes how they see the police, has built a lot of positive relationships with our community, and we were very disappointed when they told us they would not be coming this year and this summer. So that's my plea. If we could find some way to get them back into our center as well as others, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. We have Emily Collins, followed by Mike Johnson.
Hello. I live, work, and pay taxes in this city, and I'm quite honestly dumbfounded that the city council at this point still needs convincing that more police are needed in our city. I happen to reside in a part of the city where it's the longest response times of anywhere. The fact that there is a discrepancy in response times anywhere in our city is completely unacceptable. The fact that there's one, let alone thousands of unresponded calls is unacceptable and dangerous. I hear a lot from the city council about how the Minneapolis Police Department culture needs to change, and I'm not here to dispute that. But I am very curious what plan you would have to do that when the Minneapolis Police Department is so understaffed and overworked. What example would you give of a workforce understaffed and overworked having a culture change for the better? It's completely unacceptable. Please stop making a safety issue a political issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Johnson, followed by our last registered speaker here, which is Jamar Iverson. So if you wanted to speak after that, please make sure you sign in with Kelly over here by the timer.
Hi, my name is Mike Johnson. I had a chance to accidentally end up at a police award ceremony. And if you want to see the culture of the police, you should just go to one of those where they're saving people with 4 gunshot wounds. They're solving cases that are 20 years old. I'm getting really sick of these PowerPoint presentations where people say that the police have to change the culture. Are you kidding me? It's the police culture that needs to change. They're saving lives as best they can. And you got a library down there with 20 drug dealers around it. You got 20 stinking people cracked out inside the library. And this is the culture you want to change? Are you freaking kidding me right now? The police are about 100th on a list of cultural problems. Drive-by shootings, drug dealing. I mean, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. 45-minute wait times, and you think it's rocket science to add more police? I support the police department. I'll try to always be down here to support the police department. But when it went unchallenged for years, where were all the people? Except for her and maybe one other person. I rarely see anybody come down here and say I support the police. And when the police chief gives a presentation, if you give stats, that's somehow a problem, a political problem. I don't think so. And the idea that only 60 or 65% support the police, more police, that's ridiculous. It's got to be closer to 80. Anybody that's law-abiding should want more police. So as far as these PowerPoint presentations, as one man said, they make us dumber. And I agree. This is ridiculous to beg for police when you have 45-minute wait times. So thanks.
Thank you. We have Jamar Nelson as our last registered speaker.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I just got to be real with you. I have never before, and I've lived here a long time, I've never before met a more transparent chief than the one we have now. I've also not seen a chief had his hands tied as much as this chief has with his discretionary spending and things of that nature. He has to be supported. This guy makes it his business to make sure that he's involved in the community. When I say transparent, I mean any and every concern that you have, you can take to the chief. The chief he tries his best to bring you good results and answer you as honestly as he can. The work that the chief is doing with the community is vitally important to building a good relationship. I understand that a lot of community members may not want to have more police officers, but how can you proactively combat crime if we don't have officers there answering calls in a timely fashion or tied up doing other things? The chief has to have the support of city council as well as the community. Those two bridges together, we can get much more things done if we're supporting the guy. I know I can call the chief at any time of the night. He might get a little angry, but he will answer the call. And that's what's important. I'm just going to be real. The last chief we didn't have that relationship with. The last chief didn't think it was important to have a good, honest relationship with the community. This guy does. We need to support. And I'm sound like a broken record because support is the operative word here. We got to support him so he can support us. And I will continue. I know a mother's love will, and I will. And a lot of community members will continue to support him wholeheartedly because, again, this is a guy that wants to see the right things done in the city, wants to have a safe city, and we need to support that as well. I know my time's only up here, and I go on, but if we are going to do the right thing is to support Chief Arredondo. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. So without more registered speakers here, we will go ahead and receive and file these public comments. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And I will note we have been joined by Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins. Welcome. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 items in our consent agenda that I would like to go ahead and approve. I'll read them very briefly here. It's authorizing a contract with Grandma's Marathon for the Minneapolis Police Department's bomb canine services, authorizing an increase to contract number C35511 with ShotSpotter Inc. for support and maintenance of the ShotSpotter's gunshot location system. We have a contract with authorizing a contract with SecureNet LLC to provide a virtual safety network for crime investigations. We also have another contract authorizing a grant acceptance from the Minnesota Department of Commerce for Minnesota Auto Theft Prevention for the Minnesota Auto Theft Prevention Program. And our final consent item is accepting a Minnesota Board of Firefighter Training and Education Training Academy reimbursement. Are there any questions on the consent agenda? Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Connor. Just a quick comment, since I'm the person everybody will call about watchdogging this. I just want to clarify for everyone that the SecureNet contract is not an expansion of services. It's an extension of the length of the contract and an adjustment to their pricing schedule, but we're not adding any new surveillance tech.
Thank you. And without further questions, we shall go ahead and adopt the consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now we are going to our final piece of the agenda, which is a discussion item to receive and file a presentation by the Chief of Police and our MPD leadership on the department's vision and culture change, our status report here. And I just want to frame this up for the community and the media folks here today. As you know, there's a public conversation that's happening about lack of response to 911 calls and other issues that have been identified by many residents throughout our city. We have a very public conversation happening right now about whether or not the police department should get more resources to do the work that they would like to do. We are also and a very important historical point in the life of policing in our city, as we have the first African-American chief of police standing before us today, who has deep relationships in our community and has earned my personal respect over 5 years of working with you. And I did have the opportunity to work with Chief Ginny Hurteau, and I can feel the difference, and I have trust in the work that you're doing. So today we're inviting you to help us as a body of council members to get more information about the questions communities and elected officials are asking regarding what is the transformation that MPD is going through. Can we trust the department? Is this a department that is now serving our communities with more respect, with more compassion, with more love? Can we build something together that's going to deliver the results that communities have been organizing and demanding for years, and that some of us want to see? So you are the expert in this conversation, and I give you my respect for that role, and we want you to help us walk through that conversation, and then we'll take questions from council members. I will say that I'll be timing the questions today just to make sure that everyone gets an equal opportunity to engage. So I'll hopefully just keep my eye on the clock and make sure folks have 10 minutes to engage with the chief, and then we'll rotate and we'll come back to folks if everyone's had the chance to speak and ask their questions. So without further ado, please, Chief Arredondo, if you can walk us through your discussion.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Council members, thank you for having me this morning to talk about and present and share some information regarding some of the important transformational change that has been occurring within the Minneapolis Police Department in our city here over the past 2 years. You have a chief that stands before you today both humbled and honored that I've had the incredible fortune of serving our great city for the past 30 years. And as some of you may recall, when I received your support to be chief of the MPD a little more than 2 years ago on a beautiful Friday afternoon at Sabanthony Community Center, I accepted that enormous responsibility and opportunity to lead our incredible sworn and civilian team members. I knew coming into this role that we needed transformational change within the MPD. I also know that any sort of transformational change that we must have as an organization, we have to have a North Star or a compass to guide this work forward. And so I needed to also make very clear to those men and women within this organization that I had very clear expectations of what they should expect from me as chief, and also those expectations of what our community members should expect from them. And so I set out to create this vision, this North Star, to help guide us in this transformational work moving forward. I think it's important to note that being born and raised here in the city of Minneapolis and spending 30 years as a peace officer, this vision statement that I'm going to highlight today is cloaked in the needs and the ask of our community. It is not a single vision. One of the key first things in shaping our vision moving forward was the importance of sanctity of life. And as you look at our vision statement, there is a reason why that is the first paragraph, that is why that is the first important message that comes forward in this transformational change. Sanctity of life is the most precious of all of our duties as peace officers. I expect our officers and community members to go home safely at the end of their day. Our officers must do all they can to protect themselves and our community, to minimize harm and risk of personal injury. And in everything that we do in terms of this transformational change in the vision for the department, the cornerstone has to be trust. If the public trust is breached, it seriously damages that relationship between the community and the MPD. And if an MPD employee brings contempt to the department and the badge we wear, then as chief, they have forfeited their right to serve on this department. We are moving forward with this transformational change in the lens of procedural justice. And this is how we will serve our community through this evidence-based policing service. So many have asked, what is procedural justice? It is placing an emphasis on the interactions between our officers and the community that we serve. It's giving others voice, treating all we meet respectfully, making neutral decisions, and building trust with our community. And when our interactions with those we meet are procedurally just, it shapes the public's view of the police and increases our legitimacy and the willingness for the public to participate in community safety. Voice, respect, neutral engagements, building trust. In order for us to build those authentic and genuine, trusting relationships, we must serve all of our communities without bias or favor and provide the highest in policing service. As your chief, I will not tolerate discrimination. Discrimination of any kind will have no refuge here within the MPD. One of the important historical shifts within the MPD is addressing peace officer trauma. This is a major shift in encouraging and supporting our employees to feel rooted in their well-being and better able to build relationships with those in the community that we serve. Our employees' health and wellness is vitally important to me, and I expect our employees to use the many health resources that the MPD and our city of Minneapolis has to offer, and I want to encourage them to take advantage of that. Last year alone in our country, public safety responders had the highest rate of suicide. And as I may have mentioned at our last presentation, I had the very unfortunate call late last fall, when one of my supervisors took his own life. Health and wellness is very vital to this transformational change. If an employee should seek health and wellness services for the first time only after they have engaged in conduct that violates policy and procedure, that will significantly factor in to any disciplinary decisions that I must make. Accountability, I will be judged on that, and the community should rightfully so judge me on that. Our employees' word is everything, so they must be truthful in all they say or put in writing. The first time they are not, it will always be remembered. And likewise, if a colleague knows that one of our employees is not being truthful and they remain silent, they are just as complicit in this most egregious act. Those we serve will not tolerate employees who are not truthful, and as your chief, I will not tolerate that untruthfulness either. Now, 2 years ago, as I was shaping our vision statement moving forward, I knew that there was an important role that our society has with social media. And I also wanted to make sure that I addressed any potential issues regarding social media as it comes to police officers here within the Minneapolis Police Department. Many of you may be aware that across this country, police departments have been grappling and even terminating employees who've been utilizing social media, joining hate groups and blogs of that sort. If your personal conduct and actions, including your expressions and your opinions, expressing your opinions or views on social media, are not something that you would not do openly while on duty, then simply don't do it. Part of transformational change is truly releasing the grip of past practices that foster complacency and erodes accountability. And as chief 2 years ago, I made it very clear that effective immediately, on or off-duty misconduct that may have been tolerated years ago will not be tolerated under my leadership. Two key pieces of our policy that helps to reinforce accountability is we have a police duty to report. Those officers or employees must immediately or as soon as reasonable report any misconduct on a scene of an incident to their supervisor or to the supervisor at the scene or to the internal affairs unit. We go a step further. We have a police duty to intervene, and it shall be the duty of every sworn Minneapolis police employee present at a scene where physical force is being applied to either stop or attempt to stop another sworn employee when that force is being inappropriately applied. There are several measures of accountability that we have within the organization. And the listed measures that you will see on accountability are all important. However, my vision and the work that we are doing puts significant emphasis on the role of supervisors. Commander Black will address this more in her remarks, but supervisors must be dedicated leaders who set the example and truly know their employees. Some of those measures of accountability will include supervision, training, mentoring, coaching, and discipline. Our supervisors, when I'm at home at night and those supervisors are working the shifts late at night, they have the most close proximity to our men and women who are doing this job. They have to know their people. They have to talk to them. They have to talk about their performance. They have to uplift their strengths, and they have to address any weaknesses that they have in that. They're closest to the work. And so those supervisors, I place a great deal of emphasis on their leadership. Lastly, in my vision statement, public safety is not just the absence of crime, but it is also the presence of justice. And as your chief, I am confident and determined that if our men and women believe and adhere to the vision I have set forth for the Minneapolis Police Department, collectively we will and we must be on that right side of history. Madam Chair and committee members, we are a changing culture, and our incredible sworn and civilian team members are doing such inspirational work that I feel you would all be proud of. I encourage you, if you get a few minutes during the day when you have time, to see this video, to view it. It's 7 minutes and about 7.5 minutes. But the individuals who will be speaking in this video are our employees, and they're speaking from the heart. They are not actors. And if you do get a chance, it will encapsulate some of the wide-ranging organizational things that we are doing to truly change this department, and it has some great touch points. So I would encourage you, if you get time, to do that. So I also freely admit to you that 2 years ago when I came into this role, and transformational change is indeed a big word, I'm not an expert in that. And I very intentionally sought out professionals and both who did work in transformational change in both the public and private sector to meet with me. I engaged in that shortly after I took over this position 2 years ago. I will say to all of you, when I am no longer your chief, the transformational work of the MPD is what I want to be my legacy. So I was very intentional in the design of that work, and I want that vision to outlast my tenure. This will be the future of the MPD. Some of that transformational work, we have organizational goals. We want to continue to develop our current and future leaders into strong advocates of this evolving culture. We also want to ensure that the current administration becomes part of that long-term MPD identity. We want to develop cultural leadership, and we also want to continue to strengthen the current and future leadership teams across efficiency, accountability, communication, strategic thinking, and problem solving. Through current leadership training analysis, we also have developed leadership toolkits. We have high potential leadership activation, internal leadership capability, and these are all ongoing because the work is all ongoing. And with that commitment to change strategic and intentional focus on identifying and supporting the future leadership within the MPD, I'm committed to focusing on the importance of where we place our people in assignments, what promotions look like, and what that ongoing training looks like. Any success for the MPD cannot happen without the wonderful work of our civilian team members. Our civilian team members are often behind the scenes and not always in the public eye, but they have an essential role in the MPD's culture, and their work is critical to our public safety efforts. Every civilian employee needs to be recognized, appreciated, and valued for their great work. Making sure that we have a workforce that is reflective of the communities that we serve, I wanted to provide a snapshot for everyone regarding where we are at right now as of at least late July of this year in terms of what that diversity looks like within the rank and file. Clearly, as chief, I want to continue to stay focused to making sure this department is reflective of those communities we serve. People of color and certainly our female leadership are areas that I want to continue to make sure. I know that our city enterprise as a whole has goals in that regard as well, but that is a snapshot of our reflection of where our workforce or what our workforce looks like. One of those key areas in terms of recruitment and diversity is our wonderful community service officer classes, and I'm proud to say that the picture you're seeing here of these young men and women are our most recent June class of 2019 and want to continue to build from that. With that, Madam Chair and committee members.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to just pause a minute here to see if any council members have quick questions for you now before we continue into the other pieces of this discussion today. Did you have one? I'm going to allow the committee members to go first. So Councilmember Palmisano.
Madam Chair, Chief Arredondo, I want to mention something that isn't in your presentation today, but to me is a big part of you realizing your vision, and it's something that I think deserves to be said and made clear. Is when you became our chief not that long ago, about 2 years ago, you moved a lot of people out of the way to start on your path towards realizing this vision. That was a very courageous move. You made several changes to leadership positions in your administration. You made several changes to inspector levels on up. And I just want to recognize that while you didn't state that, that is extremely important in culture change and the culture change that we all together here want for that organization, and it deserves to be mentioned. Thank you.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chief Arredondo. I really appreciate the emphasis in your vision on accountability, on health and wellness, even the social media policy that really says we're trying to keep up with what is our current realities. The duty to report, I'm curious, how is this being communicated? This is your vision. Mm-hmm. How is this being communicated to the rank and file? What's the process? Is there ongoing sort of touchstones, if you will, around this work? And then you talked about a video. Is that video available to the public? And
Madam Chair,
how can they access that?
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, thank you for the question. I'll tie in a little bit of Councilmember Palmisano's comments as well, because you asked about how is this being resonated. It is important for me. The shelf lives of chiefs are not that long, and so I'm kind of at my tailwind here, but it is important that this work outlasts any chief. There were 52 chiefs before me. There will be several chiefs after me, but it's important for the first time in the history of this 150 years that we're truly trying to make sure that we do some transformational change that will be long-lasting. How is that work being resonated throughout the rank and file? Leadership is very key. Leadership is very important. Commander Blackwell will also go into detail in terms of everything from hire through retire where this work is being resonated. I meet and I clear my calendar for several days to meet and sit down and interview one-on-one every community service officer, every recruit, every cadet that comes through our door who wants to wear this badge. And I have the conversations. Why do you want to serve here in the Minneapolis Police Department? The most important character trait for me is character. I ask them about their character. I ask them, what does community mean to you? And how will you prove and how will you perform procedural justice within that community? So that is before they even have any other touch points with any other functions within this organization. From that point moving forward, our training academies, all of our training components are rooted in procedural justice. I talked about promotions. You cannot come before me as chief, and I sit down in all of our promoted interviews. You can't just say procedural justice or check the box. You have to have displayed that throughout your career and your journey. It's having wonderful leadership and putting people in place like a Commander Blackwell, like others throughout this department who will be here many more years than me, but who believe truly in this message. But it's also vitally important that community is steeped into these conversations. Community shares this vision as well, and community is a part of this ongoing work that we're doing. And so this work has to outlast us. Every day is important for me. Every day that I come in here to City Hall, I know that I'm on borrowed time, and we must be very intentional. I must be very intentional making sure that this work is changing. It's changing the culture, and that is part of how we do it. Commander Blackwell will talk some more about all of the touch points we do, but everything we do from our, again, if you get an opportunity to see this video, it will also share some of how we're systemically placing that in our DNA, but that is some of the areas in terms of where I'm making sure that this work is long-lasting.
And did you say the video is accessible to the public?
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, the link is in the PowerPoint and it is accessible now currently to the public. Yes.
Great.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Actually, Councilmember Fletcher had his.
Apologies. Okay. Yes, Councilmember Fletcher. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Cano, and thank you, Chief. This is a very good presentation, and there is a lot here that I really like. And for what it's worth, I hope that you're here for a long time working to build this vision. You have my support and my respect, and that does not mean that you have my blanket agreement on everything that comes out of your mouth. And in fact, you have my respect enough for me to tell you when I disagree with you and for us to continue working on this. But we are in this together. And a lot of the things that you've said here are very good. I do want to just step back for a second and point out, though, that some of the key things that you focused on that are transformational changes in the department, and I believe they are transformational changes in a department that at times has been pretty broken. One of the things that you said is that is a part of your vision is a value on the sanctity of life. One of the things that you said as a part of your vision is honesty, telling the truth. And I want to both reflect on how important those values are and what a low bar that is. That we need to be shooting so much higher in our values, and that if sanctity of life and truth were not values of this department, we should have been defunding it. And so it's very, very important. It is critical work that you're doing to get us to a place that we have trust and that we value the sanctity of life. And shame on us for not doing it decades ago. And when people have a mistrust and when people have a skepticism about where we are, that should be the absolute floor for where we're trying to get and for the belief that the community should have in this department. The other thing that I see here that I want to ask you about is there's some real tough talk about zero tolerance for behaviors that I think we all agree, things that bring shame on the department, participating in hate groups on social media for all, there's a lot of things here that you say are not going to be tolerated. My question is, does the Federation contract allow you to actually discipline for those things? How many of those things are getting turned over in arbitration? Are you actually being taken seriously as someone who's being tough on these things if we're not able to actually enact the discipline that you're saying here is exemplary of your leadership?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, I appreciate those very thoughtful questions on that subject. So, yes, there are certainly things within the Federation that I have to kind of work within some of those constraints. But in terms of the accountability piece, I am holding our folks accountable. Absolutely are some of my decisions arbitrated and grieved. Yes, absolutely. But I still have to hold firm to that. And I understand that as chief, some of my decisions will be grieved and arbitrated, but I have to explain, justify, and stand behind those decisions. And when our folks violate the public trust in that manner, I'll be there to do that. And so, but some of those are absolutely factors and how some of that plays out. But I will still stand behind those decisions.
Thank you. If I may follow up, Madam Chair. And then the other side of the equation in discipline is you initiating the discipline. And I know back around the time that you came in with the Super Bowl and everything else going on, we talked about being behind on that. And I've kind of publicly had your back about needing to get caught up, but we need to give you some time to do that. But it does feel like you've had some time now. So how are we doing on getting to that timeline? There's a sort of 45-day goal around timeline for disciplinary processes, and I've heard that we're still not there. So how are we doing in getting there?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, yes, there were some absolute delays in that, and I certainly own that. We're much better. We are looking at and trying to get some assistance with internal affairs to make sure that we have to push those back, but we're much better. We're much better than we were before. Still have some work to do, but we're getting much better. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief. I think that it's important for us to hold multiple truths, and in politics and when things get politicized, it's hard for us to do that. Things are either right or wrong, or, you know, just very cut and dry. And I think we can hold multiple truths. And a truth is that you are a tremendous chief. Your values and work ethic, I believe, like I say all the time, makes you the best chief in our country. I really deeply appreciate you and admire you and the vision that you have for this department. We particularly connect around the health and wellness piece of officers. I really, truly believe that that's important for the long-term health of the organization itself. And so I'm so grateful that you bring that up and really continue to center that whenever you talk about vision, the work of the department, you know, long-term, what your intention is as chief. It is also true that you are the first Black chief, and that is powerful and amazing. And at the same time, we have, as a council, it is our job to do oversight. So I just want to sort of name that at multiple layers of truth. Like, I am the first Black person to hold my position. Mm-hmm. It is my duty to still do this particular oversight. And if I'm doing the oversight, it does not inherently mean that I don't think we should have more officers, or, you know, like that I think that you're a bad chief. I cannot speak to how previous councils interacted with their chiefs because I was not here. And we're here now and we're doing the work. So I just have to kind of name that for the context and those multiple truths. I have a couple of questions. So discipline came up. Can you please explain your administration's structure for intake and processing of cases that the Office of Police Conduct Review and MPD's Internal Affairs have found to have merit?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, so explain the discipline process first, what that looks like, or, I'm sorry, sir.
The process of intake, so when the OPCR and Internal Affairs come forward and say, this case has merit, how does that travel through your administration before it gets to your desk, for example? Does that clear?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, so there is the Director of the Office of Police Conduct and Review, OPCR, and then there's the Internal Affairs Commander. A complaint will come into them. They will review it. They don't decide merit at that point. They will review to decide if it is deemed necessary to go further down the process now to conduct an investigation. Once that is, if it's deemed to conduct an investigation, they can also make the decision that either there's not enough information, it's not within our jurisdiction.
So I'm sorry, I'm being timed, so I want to make sure that I'm saying they already have found merit, and then, so we're done with the internal affairs investigation, and it's like, this has merit. Now it's handed to your administration. What happens after that?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, so it will be the panel. It will be the Office of Police Conduct panel. So it's 2 supervisors from the Minneapolis PD, 2 civilian members. When they decide that a case is merit, then it'll eventually get back to me at that point, and I'll review it and make my decision.
So there isn't a system within your, a system within your administration where you have someone like a deputy chief or somebody who is doing intake and reviewing and helping structure that component of it? So it just directly goes to you, and that's the system?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, so once that panel gives the merit case, it will go to a deputy chief of our professional standards. But then, in terms of process, it'll eventually come to me. It won't come directly to me. It'll come to the deputy chief of professional standards, and then I will receive it.
And what does the that deputy chief, what is their role in reviewing and getting, like, what happens when they get that in front of them and then intake that case that has been found to have merit and put it in front of you? What is their role?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, their role for an administrative standpoint could be reviewing the document, making sure that everything is properly there. It could mean that all the materials and case file evidence is properly with that case. It's more administrative, and then it ultimately it'll arrive to me.
Great, thank you. I'm curious, where do you feel the challenges are in being able to meet the 45 days? Because right now it seems like we have an average of over 90 days for many cases, and when we talk about wanting to build trust, folks being able to trust the process of accountability, like the main mechanism of accountability, I think is one big component. So can you just explain where you think that catch is in the process?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of different areas where that trust can be eroded through the lengthiness. Sometimes, quite frankly, it's an important piece, and I think it's one that the ordinance states that community members can have up to 270 days to file a complaint. So there's a length of time that can go through that. There's also, if certain cases come before me, and they have, where I've made a decision to place an employee on administrative leave, and there might be, that case may have to be reviewed by another, it could be a county attorney's office or others. There's some built-in gaps of time that will occur through that. But the thing, the process piece that Councilmember Fletcher reflected on is that barring all those other things, I need to make sure that we have a more streamlined process so that once that professional standards deputy chief gets that case and it's packaged what it needs to be, it just gets to me and I can make those decisions. And that is what we've been improving upon. But I agree that delay can erode the trust.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to ask, a culture shift within, a crucial shift in culture with MPD is for the department to operate as a department of the city rather than as a silo within itself. And so a question that I have, for example, is within your budget request to the mayor, we want to reestablish the traffic enforcement division, which is something that I have said that I have supported because I think that it's an important component, but that falls squarely within the Vision Zero plan and the work within the Public Works Department. So have you spoken with the Public Works Director about how this fits into that work? And if so, what came from those discussions?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, yes, I've had some wonderful conversations with Director Hutchinson on that. Absolutely understanding the reality and the sensitivities of what enforcement could look like from a police lens to Vision Zero. And so those discussions are ongoing. I know that there's also some committee members within Vision Zero that also want to make sure that any sort of MPD involvement is one where it is not either looked at exacerbating or contributing to any sort of disparities in that regard. And so those conversations Director Hutchinson has absolutely had with me, and they're ongoing as well. Yes.
Do I have time for one more?
Yeah.
Great, okay. And so one of the other questions that I am curious about, is it possible for us as a committee or as a council to get data over the past, let's say, 5 to 7 years about average response times broken down by precinct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that's a great question. That data, the repository folks of that would be our MECC, and I know that our wonderful new director here, Director Hughes, I don't know the answer to that. I would lean towards them if that is something that they could map out geographically.
Great. And so one of the questions that I have around response times, are officers able, so if an officer is in a squad, are they able to say no during a shift to responding to dispatch? And if so, what are the consequences for doing so?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, for clarity on my part, if are officers able to say deny a call from dispatch?
No, I'm not going to take that call, and I'm not going to take any calls tonight.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, no, that would be an issue that should be addressed right away with the supervisor, regardless of pending calls or lengthy response times. We have an obligation to get a squad there at some point in time. Officers do not have the luxury of saying no, they're not going to respond to any calls. That's not how that works.
I would like to have further conversations about that, because I do believe from my understanding that there are officers that are doing that. And so that also is impacting response times. And just generally speaking, when we look at how many officers are doing self-initiated calls versus 911 calls, we really have to kind of ask, then it seems like they're not necessarily running from call to call. And that's kind of the narrative that's created. We do have very long wait times in my community for some of the various priority calls. I have experienced it myself, and I get calls into my office a lot about that. And so again, I'm not necessarily saying no, that we shouldn't have more officers. I think that it's where my questions are, and I think it might be something that we need to dig into further, is, well, what are the officers doing when the dispatch, when dispatch is calling for officers to be, to respond? Because there are officers that are saying no. There are officers that are doing, sorry, that was distracting. So the work that the question that I have is just what are officers doing so that we know that they are responding in adequate times, rather than engaging in potential behaviors that are not, that are contributing to long response times. So.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I want to thank you for that information. Again, I will absolutely look forward to having that conversation about officers notifying our dispatch that they will not respond to calls. I absolutely want to have more of that conversation, because that should not be occurring. I do want to, just for clarity regarding self-initiated activity, self-initiated activity can also, many times, it's officers putting themselves out when they're seeing some sort of, it could be someone seems to be loitering around a business long after hours, breaking into, they can actually self-initiate a call as opposed to a 911 call response. But absolutely, I want to have more of that conversation with you. So, and I do appreciate you mentioning that we can, I've lived long enough to agree with you to know that we can hold two truths. So I appreciate you naming that.
And I just want to clarify, from the information that I've gotten, it's not that they're saying no to dispatch, it's just that they're not, we can talk more about it, but I just want to, they're not saying, no, I'm not answering that to dispatch, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions over here. So before we dive into the 911 data, I know we can maybe take care of some of that offline. I just want to check, did you two have your little things up? Okay, which one of you came first? Do you want to go? Okay, yeah. Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, I think clearly I was born prior to Council President Bender. That's what you were asking. I appreciate the presentation, really appreciated your vision statement, and hearing it again. I just have some questions in terms of how it's going. There's a part there where you talk about how you're going to improve accountability, and that actions both on and off duty that were tolerated in the past will no longer be tolerated effective immediately. I'm wondering how that's going. Have there been instances of behavior off duty that you've disciplined that wouldn't have been disciplined in the past, and how did that turn out?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, so I always look at as a leader that the discipline is one of those last resort things that you're ultimately trying to change behavior, but there are times when it has to be implemented. In my time as chief, and I want to be very careful, I also know we have our city attorney here, I don't want to go into too many personnel matters regarding discipline, but in my time as chief, I absolutely have held our folks accountable for conduct that they've committed off duty, and so yeah, that has occurred in my tenure. And when you say how is it going, I think the best measurement for me is chief. I've often said that I can quantify many things in terms of crime. I can quantify assaults and give you numbers for all of those things. But probably the most difficult thing for me as chief to quantify is a person's feeling of safety. If I had to look at how accountability has been with the PD under the last 2 years, I have heard from employees that they feel that the process is fair, that they feel that they know what to expect from me as chief, and that they understand that they are going to be held to a high standard, as they should. And so that occurs. I don't, as chief, I don't boast about discipline because I don't feel that that is effective. I think people need to ultimately, at the end of the day, they need to understand that their actions matter and that they can have a significant impact on all of us in this organization. When one employee does misconduct, it impacts all of us. It impacts our families. And so, so to your question, I have held employees accountable for off-duty misconduct. Some of it has been public in terms of the result of that discipline. But in the end, I really want, this has to be long-lasting. This has to last longer than me. And it can't be seen as Rondo's just wielding a big stick and he really just is trying to, people have to truly buy in that if we are ever going to truly be that police department that our community see us as trusting and legitimate, they have to know that we hold ourselves accountable. And so I believe we are making changes and strides in that. I believe it is far better than 5 years ago. Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I appreciate that. I think what I'm looking for is some actual tangible evidence or some kind of understanding and material. Has there been discipline? Was it followed through on? Maybe complaints are way down, which could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. We know people don't complain sometimes because they're afraid of retaliation. Even employees won't even complain about other employees and report things. So sometimes if complaints are up, it's a good thing because it's a more open system. And then what happens to those complaints? Is discipline effective? Is it timely? So I think that from my position, the intentions are really important and it's really great, and the feeling about how the culture shifting is happening too. But I'm also looking for some kind of numbers and evidence that we're seeing. The number of misconduct complaints are way down. The incidence of it, we're having trouble finding any, or when there are some, there's action taken quickly. Officers are being disciplined, coached, re-educated, reassigned, all of those things. So maybe getting some numbers would be good. And I don't need to take up a lot of the committee's time asking for specifics if you don't have specifics you're willing to share. But I did also want to ask about initiatives you have in mind for the contract. The contract is coming up with the Police Federation, and if there are obstacles in the contract that make it difficult to follow through with this vision and to improve the culture of the police department, I think we need to change that contract, and we need to have a process so that we can actually understand what's in there and have the community maybe even participate in understanding that. And then I know that this is it's a labor, negotiation matter, and I don't want you necessarily to disclose things you think it's going to hurt our position as a city or anything like that. But I just want to understand if you're looking carefully at this to see how you can use this contract so that we can better realize your vision.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, thank you for your comments. In terms of the accountability piece, I will just say that there's several layers of that includes everything from coaching, training, reassignment, up into even termination. All of those pieces I've experienced in my tenure as chief over the last 2 years. As far as the contract piece, so absolutely, I was not part of our previous in terms of really leading that last contract. This will be my first as chief. I have been meeting with key stakeholders within the MPD, but also I've been meeting with community leaders and listening to them about what's important for them in that contract. I think there's absolutely a lot of interest in that. I will tell you that as chief, managerial rights are always very key and important for me in terms of helping to move and transform this department. Health and wellness within the contract is going to be very important for me. Accountability is also going to be there. But yes, I have been meeting with community and listening to their thoughts and ideas about that contract as well.
Thank you so much for being brief with your time. We do have another question from Councilmember Lisa Bender, and then we need to get to the meaty part of the discussion. Not that this is not meaty at all, but we have some significant data and information to review that I know your department has spent a lot of time putting together. So, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for extending the invitation to council members to attend. I was able to reschedule my morning, but do need to leave at noon for another meeting. So if I miss the rest, I will catch up after this afternoon. But, I wanted to underscore a couple of things that I'm hearing from my colleagues, particularly those who serve on the committee and who have been working so closely with you and your department over the year and a half that this committee has been in place. First of all, I think we know that while the chief and this department, along with civil rights, reports directly to the mayor, unlike all of the other departments in the city, our constituents still expect the city council to be engaged in this work and hold us accountable to the results that are coming from the department. So I do think it is important that council members are able to voice our support along with our concern and questions about this department, along with all of the others in the city. We know that this budget coming up, along with the annual budgets, as well as the union contract, are important touch points that the council does have more influence over than the day-to-day policy of the department. Again, because the department reports to the mayor, we have a limited set of tools to use to directly influence the department, and our constituents expect us to use them. And I fully expect the council to therefore really dig into these two critical decision points that will be coming in front of the council. And some of them may be, specific to the language of a contract or specific to the budget, and some may be commitments that we're able to arrive to together. Again, in the context of those decision points on which we are able to vote. I think, we heard some questions about data and information. There's been a lot of discussion about that since the presentation at this committee last time. I know a number of us, I have requested a lot more context for the data that was presented, and we received some. We're still waiting for more information, looking at trends over time, understanding what the numbers mean in the context of the total calls and of our city or other trends in our city. So I look forward to continuing to work with you to understand what those numbers really mean. One thing I want to highlight that hasn't been mentioned is that, as council members, we need to, that public safety as council members comes up in many different ways through many different departments. So we have an amazing city. We also have issues, and particularly issues that tend to impact our communities of color more greatly. So we have children living in homes where they're being poisoned by lead, and we don't have enough health inspectors or building inspectors to protect our children in this community from lead poisoning. We have a very large hole in our regulatory services department that oversees some of that work and needs in our health department as well. We have people dying in our streets during traffic crashes, and we are investing in street design to help mitigate that. I hope you're working with Public Works collaboratively. Our city attorney's office is critical to the domestic violence prevention that you've partnered on. Our health department and city attorney on violence prevention work that is showing such strong results. And part of why I have appreciated your leadership so much in the 6 years that we worked together is this collaborative approach you've taken. And this presentation was really focused on the department, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about those partnerships with other departments within the city as well, because again, I think they are critical to us fully understanding how we're protecting this health and safety of our community. And I think that this doesn't really do service to all of that collaboration that's really happening.
Madam Chair, Council President Bender, thank you for your comments. And I also want to know that I am one of many department heads that through this in our organization here at the City of Minneapolis. And I also want to name that I absolutely can appreciate the enormity that all of you carry as governing leaders of our city and responsibilities you have and the fiduciary responsibilities you have for all of our residents here in the city of Minneapolis. And so I appreciate your leadership for that. You're absolutely right, Council President Bender. I recognize that policing and public safety, that's just one piece. I have been trying to make sure that I am in spaces where I can see what are the needs of our city as well. Homelessness and housing issues are very key, and I know that you and so many others here on this council are working towards that. That has a direct impact in terms of the work that we do within the Minneapolis Police Department. So it was very critical for me, starting out in 2018, that we had a liaison within our organization, Sergeant Grant Snyder, to work with those community-based groups who are doing homeless outreach to our brothers and sisters who are experiencing homelessness. It was important for me in terms of working with other credible community messengers when it comes to gun violence, and the important work that Ms. Sasha Cotton from the Office of Violence Prevention and Ferrome and all of those folks are doing. They are a conduit, and they have an extension that we are limited in as far as that. I also want to meet people where they are. We have a lot of young black and brown men who are going to be coming out of our prison systems back into our city. I go speak to them regularly and see what their needs are, and housing is one of the main things that they talk about. Mental illness and the trauma that many in our communities experience has an absolute direct impact on the work that we do. We should not be criminalizing those who are suffering from mental illness, and so working with all of the different groups and having co-responders and working with our COPE folks, that's very important to me as well. We've had Youth Link and the Link and St. Stephen's Street outreach and going to our public schools. These are all areas. Next Step, when Next Step was first created, I was a part of that group to see how can this help to reduce future gun violence in our city. And so you're absolutely right. Our children, you do a lot of great work in leading in terms of lead-based types of things. If that goes unaccounted for, that's going to play out eventually, perhaps with police department. And so we have to think broader than just policing. And I know that through your leadership and our council, you're looking at all of those different areas. And so again, I appreciate the enormity of the responsibility that all of you have as serving as our elected officials.
Councilmember Ellison, and then Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief, for the presentation. I just had a few quick questions, just because I know that when it comes to culture change in any organization, there is the intent of leadership, and I think that not only your intent, but the actions that you're taking, the steps that you're taking, are really important. And I'm really happy to see this presentation and really proud of the work that you're doing. But I also know that when it comes to discipline, a couple of my colleagues have mentioned that we are, negotiating police contract this year and that kind of thing. That in some instances there's not a lot that you can do, and I think that at some point, not all culture change has to be. Like you said, carrying a big stick, right? But if actions can't have consequences, then that is gonna stifle culture change, because people are gonna say, all right, well, here's the intent of the chief, and here's the message that I'm getting from leadership, but the follow up is just not quite there. So I know that I can continue to act the same, and so I just kind of wanted to ask, when we look at situations that aren't necessarily a reflection of your leadership, but did happen in the department last year, like, for instance, the ketamine situation. I just want to ask, were there any officers that were disciplined for that instance? Right, there were a couple of instances. Some of our officers behaving more poorly than others, but were any of them disciplined in that instance?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, thank you for your comments on that. Specifically to that issue surrounding ketamine, I'm not aware that there was any discipline of any of the officers mentioned in that. Yes.
I think about last year also, we had the marijuana sting that was proven to have so much racial bias that the DA refused to prosecute. Was anybody disciplined in that instance?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, the one thing I would say regarding the small amounts of marijuana was that it is my understanding that the DA's office did not prosecute those cases because of bias. My understanding is it was they ultimately made a decision based upon the quantity of the marijuana that they chose not to. I had not received any information that from the county attorney's office that they refused to charge based on bias.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. But was anybody disciplined in that instance? It does seem like to have a lot of resources go into that. There was a lot of discussion around the racial bias in that instance. Was anybody disciplined or even coached through that instance?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, so I recall doing speaking to the media shortly after that came, this came to light. One of the things that I had said at the end of that presentation was, I do not, and I still firmly stand behind this, I do not want the MPD to contribute to a sense of hopelessness, particularly to our young black and brown young men. But I also said at the end of that press conference, that this is a call to action. There are too many of our young black and brown men who, for whatever reason, feel that the only way that they can thrive or survive is sometimes through selling drugs. That has to change. And I asked I'll meet with social workers, faith leaders, teachers, counselors, because we have to address that. Sadly, no one stepped up to meet with me. We still have issues, unfortunately, in our city where that hopelessness still exists with many of our young and black brown men. I say that to say that when I reviewed every single case with the supervisor for that downtown unit and looked at every single case that was captured on video, I did not see myself as chief or as an African-American male that there was intentional bias in that. The outcome was absolutely disparate, but I did not see, and I'm speaking honestly to this board here, I did not see any intentional biases or what have you. And that is why I said we need to have a call to action to address this. I will tell you to this day, downtown is still having high arrest rates of young brown and black men for selling felony level narcotics. And it's still the same disparity numbers. And so in those that I have viewed on video, I don't see racial animus towards those arrests. But we have to, those are tough conversations, and we have to have those conversations. So no officers were disciplined in that matter. And quite frankly, I didn't see any racial animus that they had towards it. It is a reality, unfortunately, in some sectors of our city. And again, I will not stand before you as chief to say that we're going to be able to solve that problem. And quite frankly, we shouldn't be the ones to have to do that. There are far better, more qualified, credible people within our community that can help lead that discussion. I want to make sure we're at the table, but we have to have that discussion. Yeah.
I appreciate that response and that clarification. Just the last question I had was, there was a question brought up earlier about when you take disciplinary action, how that plays out in arbitration. And I agree with you that you still have to take the disciplinary action no matter what. But I wondered, if even before we adjourn here, if somebody from your staff would be able to get us numbers on how many acts of discipline are taken to arbitration that you've initiated, how many how many of your decisions are upheld, and then how many are overturned via arbitration? Because I feel like, if on one hand, you're saying, hey, this violates our code of conduct here in the MPD, and so you have the rank and file hearing that message from you, but then they're getting put right back in their jobs. I feel like that's something that could undermine your leadership, and it could certainly undermine culture shift as it's trying to happen, because it not only sends a signal to that officer who's maybe been reprimanded and then gone through the arbitration process that leadership's decisions don't matter, but it sends a signal to everyone else that, oh, you know what, there's a line that I can push here, and I know that every single time one of my colleagues wins an arbitration, I can push that line just a little bit further. So would it be possible if someone could get your staff, or someone from your staff would be able to get us those numbers again? Not names of officers, not individual cases, but just, how many of your decisions have been upheld and how many have been overturned via arbitration, I think would be something good for the public and for the council to know.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, it's a great question. I'm leaning towards our city attorney here for some legal.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'll mention to my office and also labor relations in the city that sort of oversees the arbitration processes and inquire about summary data that they've kept, and I'm sure they do keep such data.
Would it be possible for us to have that data for the public before we adjourn here, or acquire that data in about an hour?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I don't know. I'll try, but my guess is we won't be able to get it that fast unless it's ready to go on somebody's desk.
Okay, thank you.
I will say that we can certainly look at bringing up that conversation in a more coordinated way with a little bit more time at the next public safety meeting, so we can huddle up after this and see if that's possible, because it seems like there's a lot of questions around that, so happy to work with you both on that. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we want to move on to the next presentation, but a couple of things. First, I think it's worth pointing out that our chief, the people who write policy within MPD, and the mayor implemented policy immediately on the discovery of finding out that there was officer input with EMS potentially on decision making. That was an immediate response. I appreciate I appreciate the expeditious way in which MPD has been changing policy, sometimes in reaction to things that we didn't know were going on. But that deserves pointing out, because I believe that since there was no prior policy in place, that officers would not have been disciplined on it because there wasn't a policy that existed. The other piece that I would lift up and highlight for my colleagues is that we do, as our chief, ask you to be lion-hearted in forging forward with your vision and in discipline measures specifically. To one of the council members, the council president's important points, one of the ways that we work together as a council with MPD is to work together and to push you in doing some other things. And one of those things is communication. I think I'd echo Councilmember Cunningham's point in saying that you have been extremely communicative in a way that I haven't seen in the past. One of those ways is in these videos. These videos, you didn't mention this, but they are on insidempd.com. I think that there's 2 links to other ones later in this other presentation in front of me. And, I really encourage that, because over and over we sit in some conversations, and I have had some hard conversations on policing these past couple of years in community. And something that I get a little bit frustrated about in having those hard conversations is how much the public doesn't know about what goes in and how officers are trained, what we're about to talk about next, and also your vision. And it helps when people can sit in community and hear from you directly. And so these videos, I hope and kind of expect, will help to make that point and bring it to a broader audience. Another thing that's pretty important is the website. Chief, you spearheaded the push at the department to make everything MPD is doing available for the public to see online. Crime stats, use of force information, stop data arrests, everything is there. It's both good and it's bad. But it's easy to stand up and talk about success, but I think one thing that makes you unique is your willingness to be transparent when it's difficult. Your willingness to be transparent when you may not have all the information, but you're trying to get out what you have. And you're able to show where there's areas when we're falling short. So I do thank you for that. Another way that I heard Councilmember Gordon mention is in measurements, right? And I do want to say, I do think that's a council responsibility. I have asked the city coordinator to work with our partners like Bloomberg on different ways across the country that people are measuring police change and culture change and modernizing our Western culture of policing. I've also approached Deputy Chief Knight, who's here in the audience, with his ideas on how to measure culture change and to work with our audit team on that. And I think that as soon as those are kind of vetted and able to show, that we should maybe bring those back and bring those back to our council. One last thing I wanted to mention is that part of culture change and part of shifting this and achieving this transformational change that you want, Chief Arredondo, is through us. And I ask again, and I ask publicly all of my colleagues to actually participate when asked. Commander Blackwell instituted a leadership institute where she asks council members to come down and to have real conversations with hard questions being asked from our leadership change class. And I've seen very, very few of my colleagues participate in those. Thank you, Council Member Cunningham, for being one of those regular participants of that forum. I think we need to find other ways to get together, because we on this council are also going to be part of innovating and changing the culture in MPD. That's all I got.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. I did want to say, Chief, that it's been a blessing to see someone like you rise within the ranks of the MPD, being born and raised in Minneapolis, building the city, being a part of the city, earning the trust of our community every day by showing up through your consistent leadership. Trust is not something that you get one day and then you have like a 10-year lease on it. You have to earn it every day. And so knowing what I know about how people of color are treated within the enterprise in this municipality, I know that they'll spit you out, chew you up, spit you out real quick. So it's nothing short of a miracle to have someone like you leading our department, who at one time tackled racism within the department head on. So that history is important to me, and I think sometimes people of color don't get a fair shot at leadership positions like this to prove what we can do, to prove that hope and that change that we want to see is no longer in the chapter of skepticism, which is where I was 5 years ago. I didn't really think it could be achieved through MPD. I learned a lot over the last 5 years by working with our officers, by door knocking when there's shootings in my ward, by meeting monthly with our community response team leads, and I see the dynamic picture that we have here, and I do sometimes regret not taking different actions before. So it's never too late, and I want to tell you that this work of transformation, it is what we're doing here right now, and I don't want you to give up, and I don't want you to feel alone in that work. We're doing that work together. This is a part of it. I want you to be strong in that, to keep going, because I wouldn't want to see you leave and leave us with one of the biggest and probably undoubtedly the toughest job in the city. I think you have the toughest job in the city. And you have my support, and you have a lot of the council member support in the community, and it was really beautiful to hear about the bridges. One of the speakers today talked about building those bridges between the council and the mayor and the chief and the community, and I think that's possible. And I think you've been one of the people that have helped deliver that sense of hope within me, because like I said, when I started this job 5 years ago, I wasn't hopeful that we could get there. So I'm here to do that work with you, as hard as it may be. So with that, let's turn the page and go on to training and other important items on how we are improving our policing in the city.
Madam Chair, council members, at this time I'd like to bring up Commander Katie Blackwell, who oversees our MPD training unit.
Thank you, Commander, for being so patient. We really appreciate your time.
Madam Chair, City Council members. So I'm Katie Blackwell, and I oversee the training division. I'm very honored and humbled to work with the training staff that I do. And today I'm here to give you an overview of what the training division does and helping out with that cultural and transformational change that through the chief's vision. And a lot of our training was support and guidance, not only from our chief, but as well as our community members. So it was really important how we're doing our training. So this slide you'll see is an overview of our chart of our training division. And it really starts with our support service, their civilian personnel, and they focus on keeping all the training records. Underneath that, we have our pre-service, which is our academy of our recruits, cadets. And then we go into our crisis intervention team program. as well as our medical support program. We also have post-service, which is really in service. It's all the mandatory requirements, which I'll get into, that post requires us. And defensive tactics, our range, and then our patrol operations. Our new unit is the leadership and professional development programs, which include reentry training for anybody that leaves the department for extended period of time, and they come back, we retrain them. And then our career enrichments is a development type of tool that we use, and I'll get into that. And then our field training officer program. So the Minnesota Board of Peace Officer Standards and Training Requirements has certain requirements that they mandate on all agencies in the state, and then there's department mandates that we do. So the state standards are that we have 48 hours of training within 3 years. Annually, we do use of force, emergency vehicle operations. Within the state, we do once every 5 years is required. Minneapolis requires once every 4 years that we go through that. As well as our weapon qualifications, our annual shotgun and handgun qualifications. The state requires this at 70%. Minneapolis, we require 80%. It's important to note that the state of Minnesota requires higher standards than many other states to become police officers. Candidates have to be at least 21 years old, have to have a 2-year degree in law enforcement, and pass a peace officer license test at a minimum. Across the country, these standards vary. There are states that do not require a college education, do not have law enforcement skills or academies, and some do not require a state license at all. Departments within those states may have different requirements depending on each agency within their state. And I don't have all the statistics from every state, but I'm going to talk about some of our neighboring states. The state of Wisconsin does not require officers to be 21. Some agencies in Wisconsin, they're not required by the state to have police academies or be licensed by the state. Iowa does not require officers to be 21 or have a 2-year degree or be licensed by the state. Illinois does not require officers to have a college degree or be licensed by the state. And then agencies also under Minnesota Post standards, we have to be required and in service in these areas, and that's mental health crisis response, and that includes recognizing mental health issues, having an awareness, and responding and de-escalation techniques. Also conflict management and mediation, and recognizing and valuing community diversity and cultural differences to include implicit bias training. 1/3 of our training has to be procedural justice, integrating communications and de-escalations, and it's about 16 hours every 3 years is required. Minneapolis requires more, and we do a lot more with our training. If you weren't familiar with implicit bias, it's just recognizing and understanding and addressing that we may have an unconscious assumption about regarding a social group, specific ones. And so we do a lot of training. Our whole department's been trained on that. So I'm going to switch over to just kind of how our past training went, and then how we have been currently going. So the past training, which we conducted previously to 2015, was 1 to 2 days of in-service. And that was basically just covering the mandated post requirements. And then in 2015 to 2017, we switched over to patrol online courses, which were basically technology web-based mandatory requirements that were monthly. And that created a little gap in our big gap in our department, with missing out on that hands-on training doing the patrol online. And then newly promoted supervisors only had a 2-day orientation where they would come in, get a lecture-based orientation, and then they would hit the streets and hopefully do their best. And then employees had to seek out their own developmental courses and opportunities. And there was a big misalignment and inconsistencies from training instructors, how they taught community service officers, how they taught the academy, and then how they taught the in-services were different across the board. So with that, with our current training, because of the communities and the chief input, we wanted to change, we have been changing since 2017, how we're incorporating all this training. So we incorporated and integrated the current chief's vision of trust, accountability, and professional service into every aspect of our training. We added interactive training to use critical decision-making skills, de-escalation techniques, and procedural justice principles. And then we added 6 days total of in-service throughout the year in 3 different phases where they continually develop throughout the year. Incorporate the use of more technology platforms to deliver training to the department to be more responsive to current trends and needs. And that's if there's an immediate trend, whether for officer safety or citizen safety, we can immediately push out a technology video to the roll call rooms and try to train our officers more quickly before we can bring it into in-service. We also looked at our lesson plan development and documentation, which is now more consistent. We require training syllabuses, itineraries, and resumes to make sure that those that are teaching our classes are actually have the credentials to teach our classes. And the biggest component we added was a big emphasis on health and wellness. So a lot of this we already trained on, and a lot of this we have coming into training soon. Nutrition, physical fitness, sleep deprivation, mindfulness, stress, and most importantly, mental health and well-being resources for our officers. We are training more proactively versus reactively than in the past, and we've also added training staff and instructor courses to ensure consistency of the training throughout the department that is in line with the chief's vision. So when we look at our current alignment and additions, this is a list of everything that we have, it's either new or modified, and I'm going to talk about specifically each one of these. But the Leadership and Professional Development Program is new as the 2017 at the end of. And then Defensive Tactics Team, we've upgraded, modified, and added people to. Our Medical Support Program is a newer program. Procedural Justice, we continue to update that and incorporate it in as much training as we can. Patrol Operations is also a new function. Our Field Training Program was modified and updated. Our Crisis Intervention Team and our Impacts Program, which is the integrated management of Police and Crisis Training System. Our CIT program's always been there, and I'm going to talk in a minute about what our new impact program is in the Minneapolis Police Department. And then our Women's Leadership Academy that's coming in October this year. So first, I'm really proud of our impacts program, and it basically what it is it's really an upgrade from our Crisis Intervention Team program that was established in 1989. CIT came about. So over the years, it has morphed, and we've really catered it to the Minneapolis community and our agency. And really, the program was named because the goal of every police contact is to leave long-lasting positive impacts within the community. So our main goal with this program is the sanctity of life, officer safety, and the protection of the public shall be the principles of the MPD Crisis Intervention Program. A de-escalation training program that is a partnership between police, mental health agencies, advocates in the community who seek to achieve the common goals of safety, understanding, and service to individuals in crisis and those suffering from mental health issues in their families. And reducing the need to use deadly force, upholding the sanctity of life, building community trust, and protecting officers from physical, emotional, and legal harm are the cornerstones of impacts. And in 2018, we put 831 officers were introduced to the 4 hours, and our first impact course will roll out in September. So with that, we use the critical decision-making model. A lot of agencies use this. We catered it to Minneapolis to include the procedural justice in the middle with voice neutrality, respect, and trust. We use this throughout all of our training. And in fact, the recruits in the academy and on field training get graded on this, even with the procedural justice. And what it is, it's just a critical decision-making model. A lot of officers use this based upon their experience. It's helping younger officers get there quicker and slowing things down and really thinking about what they're doing. And then our MPD leadership course, we just started that in 2018. And it's thank you for those that have participated. I know I've seen many of you there, and I really appreciate that, and the mayor. So the goal of our course is to strengthen and enhance in leadership skills, attributes, and confidence over this 2-week course. We cover a wide variety of topics to include leadership, MPD values and mission, accountability, professionalism, mental health crisis response, conflict management, procedural justice, importance of stakeholders and relationships and partnerships. We cover a lot of policies and procedures, computer skills, developing action plans, effective writing, presenting, debriefing, critical decision-making skills, de-escalation, crime scene management, community engagement, media relations and public speaking, health and wellness, and their moral and legal responsibilities as a supervisor. We truly take them out of their comfort zone in that class through tabletop exercises and through different practical exercises, push them out of their comfort zone on how they would handle a lot of different situations, to include if they're having employee conflict or employee disciplinary issues. There's a link for this course at the end of this slide deck, and it's open to the public if they want to see more. And then moving on to our Women's Leadership Academy, this is new. Ramsey County started it, and then we adopted it and started catering it towards Minneapolis, but it's a structured 1-week program introducing from the women from the community into the field of law enforcement through a variety of courses that will allow women to explore different aspects of being a police officer. Women will get hands-on everyday training from actual law enforcement personnel that will guide them through each of this course in a welcoming, encouraging environment. Overall, the goal is to have women walk away wanting to learn more and eventually want to become part of our Minneapolis Police Department family. Our defensive tactics team, we included full-time instructors. Basically, our goal here is that officers are receiving scenarios that will help them in real-life situations while they're out on patrol, and also help resolve situations where officers have to go back to calls over and over again. We're trying to reduce that through this scenario-based training. But they conduct de-escalation takedown techniques and integrated communication assessments and tactics through scenario-based training. They do a lot of research, reviews, and train on new legal updates, policies, and best practices regarding use of force, ICAT, and de-escalation. They review, test, and train on safer empty hand control techniques. They teach multiple officer control techniques with the emphasis of de-escalation, communication, and body control. They held a defensive tactics instructor course this year to make sure all of our part-time instructors were also on the same consistency level of what we're doing. And they also conduct monthly training and then weekly training for any patrol officers that want to come in and attend that training. So our range staff, they've designed their training that involves the use of critical decision-making skills, de-escalation tactics, identification and recognizing dangerous and imminent threats, and proper use of force responses to those threats. Enhanced training in the use of alternative options in the event of actively violent, aggressive, or assaultive type behavior. The goal of that training is to have more alternative options than going straight up to the top on the force level. Our patrol operations is a new program, and MPD Patrol Operations is dedicated to fully preparing officers and supervisors for the rigors of complex decision-making in the patrol environment. The fundamental goal of patrol operations is to educate sworn personnel the most effective patrol tactics, techniques, and procedures in order to preserve life and to protect the communities they serve. Our academy, we've done a lot of changes in our academy, including scenario-based training, and I heard this question mentioned earlier to the chief. I just want to address a little bit. But a lot of our scenarios, we're trying to, obviously police officers go from calls, whether it's theft, to a higher adrenaline call and back. So we're trying to incorporate our scenarios that covers also duty to intervene. So our young officers are starting to see that through their scenario-based training.
Commander Blackwell, 1 second, please. Councilmember Ellison would like to address the presentation.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, I have to have a meeting at noon for an ordinance, so I wanted to get a question in before I had to go, and I'm sorry that I won't be able to be here for the rest of the presentation. I wanted to back up to the officer wellness portion where that was mentioned. And I know, and I just wanted to ask a clarifying question because I hear us talk a lot about officer wellness, but I don't hear us explicitly talking about therapy. And I know that, like, Resma Menakem, who is he's a local therapist. A lot of people know him. He wrote a book recently. And I also know that he spent time working in Iraq with the U.S. military, and he talks about the accumulative stress and how that is the stuff that really just sort of gets folks who have high stress work environments to just kind of break down. And I know that that we have our officers go through therapy in instances of when they've experienced trauma. But I wondered, that feels a little late, right? And I wondered, how are we either encouraging, incentivizing, or maybe even mandating that officers are addressing their mental health? I mean, yoga's great, and nutrition's important, and exercise is important, but I also just wanted to ask that question specifically about, are we naming therapy, and is that a part of what we're doing when it comes to mental health for officers?
Yeah, so we actually started the last couple of years bringing in, we have a peer team, and then we have our wellness program, and they're incorporated starting from the academies that they meet. When we meet with our officers monthly in the field training program, that's where they have the chance to sit down and talk with that officer, and we also give them opportunities and resources there's free therapy that goes on, and we give them the numbers and resources for that. As well as right now, I'm going to get into, you're going to miss, but the field training officer program, we bring back officers monthly. And we incorporated mindfulness not only in the academy, but in the field training program, and that will roll out again in fall in-service this year. So giving that resources, and I know the health and wellness program is working really hard on apps that, on different things and programs out there that lets officers know where they can go for help. Yeah.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, that is a great question. I will say that one of the things that I'm working with our leadership team on is instituting what I'd like to call a wellness mandatory check-in. And that includes from me to the most newly hired. The last time I sat before a psychologist was 30 years ago when I came on. And I would say that I've experienced a lot in those 30 years, and I can imagine others throughout this career have as well. It is not anything punitive, but we need to have more of a mandated check-in with our folks because too oftentimes it is reactionary. And the thing has already occurred. And so I think if we are truly committed about the health and well-being of our men and women, we have to make sure that we're doing a check-in just to see where they are. And we have not had that ever. And so those are ongoing discussions there, and I think it's very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to let the commander get on with her presentation, but I do want to mention mindfulness, that other sub-bullet in the previous slide, is exactly how we train before trauma. We train for trauma. That's how we are able to get officers who are here to serve in the right way, in the way that is consistent with our values as a city. And mindfulness is what I have seen and been able to be part of in their cadet training program. And I imagine that you would welcome any one of us as policymakers to go through some of that work ourselves. It is not the first time I've heard about the wellness check-ins asked from the chief. That's going to take some resources to actually be able to do. But I also invite my colleagues to really start to participate in the mindfulness aspects of how we're training police today, because it's very different than it was just a few years ago.
Yes, it was. Thank you. And I'll make sure to invite Madam Chair and City Council members to some of our training coming up that will be including mindfulness techniques and de-stress things and that nature. So,
thank you.
And then just in the academy, we changed. Recruits are attending monthly ride-alongs now. So they're in the academy learning. They go out on the street. They see what real police work is happening out there to help them with that mind shift from when they do leave the academy to transfer over to the patrol. And then they're taking back what they learned from the street into training, and there's a lot of check-ins there, so it's been pretty effective so far. We also incorporated more interactive training to improve interpersonal communication skills, exercise procedural justice principles, multitasking, and enhance their learning retention. And that really is just changing up, instead of all lecture-based class, and we're doing a lot of hands-on and interactive training with them. And then instruct proper methods of physical fitness techniques, mindfulness, overall health and well-being. And the biggest thing is maintain a structured climate of accountability and professionalism aligned with the chief's vision through the procedural justice principles of knowing, showing, and enforcing the standards of everyone. Their classmates are very well aware in the academy that there's a standard, and they all have to hold each other accountable as well as leaders on that in the academy. And our field training program, we changed it up last year, and basically, if you're not familiar with our field training program, it provides recruits with the training and support required to become competent patrol officers who can independently and successfully perform their duties. Our field training officers will achieve this mission by teaching, supervising, mentoring, evaluation, and documenting the recruit's performance. So one of the things that we did last year is implemented a 40-hour FTO course. It's based a lot similar to the FTO or to the leadership principles, but we're looking for consistent field training officers and what we're teaching, what we're training out there, and change the mindset to that mentorship and focusing on teaching the recruits that critical decision-making model and having FTOs debrief recruits after calls on that critical decision-making. And then we created a 3-week orientation period on the front end to transition from recruits from the academy to patrol. Monthly training for recruits during their FTO, which we just talked about, but the focus is on empowerment, performance, well-being, health and wellness, debriefings, escalation, and procedural justice. And we approved attrition to this pilot project from previous classes. This last class just finished up, so that we improved attrition rates through our FTO program in that aspect. So our medical support program is a wonderful program. They conducted initial emergency medical responder program to all recruits. They created an Narcan program and delivered it to all officers. They incorporated emergency medical response training for officers to perform immediate life-saving measures to anyone with serious or life-threatening injuries. And I just want to say that we do a lot of blended training with our medical support staff and a lot of different aspects of training. So no matter what happens, they're responding quickly to life and doing life-saving measures, which really paid off. Just in 2019 alone, the life-saving measures, officers administered, this is this year only, 76 doses of Narcan. They applied 27 tourniquets and 15 chest seals on people with serious or life-threatening injuries. In 2019 alone, we've given 25 life-saving awards to our officers. This program is saving lives, along with our IMPACTS program and CIT programs. So just an overview of training. In 2018, we have delivered over 2,581 hours of training over 358 days. In 2019, currently, we're up to about 1,200 hours, and the year's not done. So with that. And then just the link for the MPD Police Leadership Course and the Women's Leadership Course for community members that's coming up.
Thank you. We have a question or a comment from Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. And thank you for your leadership in this work. I have really enjoyed being able to take part in the leadership course and being able to have some real talk with officers and who are rising in leadership. That has just been a very enjoyable experience as a council member to be able to, from both directions, remove that barrier between us and the folks who are doing the work in MPD. So thank you for your leadership and for having us involved with it. So I have a few questions. The first is, how often are officers trained in procedural justice and implicit bias? Is that annually or is that one time?
So we're required 16 hours every 3 years, but we do a lot more. So the recruits alone in the academy get 24 hours of procedural justice, and then that's carried over each year into in-service, at least one big block of instruction, a 4 to 8 hour block. But we incorporated it into more of our training. So it's not just lecture-based, or we're trying to be more interactive with it, and bringing in other communities and cultures that explain what they're doing. We're trying to partner up there as well. So we're trying to change it from lecture-based to really incorporating it in everything we do.
More hands-on learning. I think that's experiential learning is just the better route to go, because folks can think that they got it up here and then don't have it when your body needs it necessarily. So I think that's really great. And along those same lines, well, first, is the national initiative still present within MPD in doing the work that started?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, they officially it was a 3-year. They are not. However, it was very important for me that we established our own MPD procedural justice unit to again outlast and outlive tenures. So while they are still providing at times technical assistance for us, we again are incorporating this into our DNA throughout the organization. So officially that ended in terms of that official arrangement, but we have enough, and I know Deputy Chief Knight is here. His teams, we're doing it in everything from hire through retire. So
yeah, so thank you for that, Chief. One of the things that I really liked about the initiative, the national initiative, was that they had the data where it wasn't connected to anybody, but you were able to see overall the changes in implicit bias, for example. So I guess I'm curious, because when we look at complaints that folks make to the OPCR, we see folks who are mostly complaining around procedural justice and implicit bias. So how are we measuring the quality of the trainings, for example, and how the impact it's having in the department?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that's a great question. So I should say that we are still engaged with them in some measurements they are looking at. I know that a component of that is traffic stops and what types of biases or disparities exist in that. They are also doing, so they actually have a lot of they've done a data dive into our policies, our procedures, the impacts that have. They are also doing some work in terms of what our city looks like in terms of how does poverty impact the work that we are doing? How does public transportation, they're doing all of these types of things. And so we want to make sure that we're measuring that to make sure that we are getting better as we do that. So we still, and by the way, we're also working closely with the Cities United and other groups to help us get some measurements there as well.
Great. I would be interested in us maybe having further conversations about that particular component because of the fact that it was unidentified data. We were able to have measures of the department overall, and so that's kind of like capturing the culture change. That's just being able, like, for you to be able to say, see, we can quantifiably say it's not just these officers in this place, but overall the department, we are seeing these sort of changes in implicit bias based on these measures. So I'd be interested in maybe talking more about that to see if there's something we could do to be a support. Another thing I wanted to ask was about youth development training. Is there training available for officers, training available or required around youth development? How to be able to interact with kids?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that's great because we are interacting with young people all the time. We don't have, and I'll let Commander Blackwell correct me if I don't know if we don't have a formalized youth development training course or piece. And I'm not sure if one of the training components throughout the academy where we have young people come in, but that's a great question. I don't know if
So last year we conducted, it was specifically to mental health with autism, and then there was childhood trauma. So if it involves more crimes, that's where we really focus on what we're training with the children. So does that answer our council member?
Yeah, so that's helpful to know. I would say that there's an organization called Strategies for Youth, and that's all that they focus on is youth development training for officers. And then there have been some cities where young people themselves have led training on how officers should interact with young people, and so we have a lot of really brilliant young folks in the city, and so I think that we can maybe do something here too. So I just want to put that on your radar. Used to work with kids forever, so I feel like I always have to kind of drop that in there. And then the last thing, I just want to raise and praise the CSO program. Really doing amazing work, really diversifying the department. It's something that really, I think, flies under the radar, so I just want to make sure that we bring it to the attention and raise and praise, because we saw the picture of the class. Like, that is reflective of our city, and that's what we're aiming for. And so thank you all so much for your work with the CSO program. It's a form of training, so I wanted to plug it in here. But thank you so much for that. It's really amazing work, and I hope that we're able to tell the story about the work that gets done and how that's changing the department overall. And then my last question I have is around the FTO program. During their work, is there time and capacity for folks to be able to be connecting with community organizations and residents as they're doing that work, or is it that they need more time? Like, is there capacity for them to be able to be making those kind of connections?
So we used to have excuse me, council member, we used to have community members, or that they would do volunteer work during their field training program, but they have so much going on during that, and they're really stressed out a lot more during their field training. So we started that in the academies, where they have to do, and then they give, actually, at the end of the academy, they let us know how many volunteer hours that they did in their community. And then just the monthly trainings that where we bring them back, we've introduced community members that taught the mindfulness or taught different things, or come in and speak to them. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sort of. Because I appreciate the volunteer component. I think I'm just more thinking about relationship building rather than hours of volunteering. So I think that's really wonderful, and I'm super glad that they're doing that. But I'm thinking about, are they sitting down with, folks like Mad Dads or A Mother's Love, or neighborhood associations or business associations, to begin building those relationships so folks know who they are, so the community is humanized, so they have a good idea going into it, not just the law enforcement but the lived experience in the community, what works, what doesn't work, where to keep an eye out, be able to get a community perspective. And so it sounds like FTO is pretty intense already. So from your perspective, would adding more time to that process help give some space for that sort of relationship building?
So actually right now, based on national standards, we're trying to cut the time down from field training and still check in with them and make sure they're doing okay. This is the first pilot project that is going through that, but I don't think more time necessarily is when we do it in the academies, and then maybe a little bit on that monthly training when they come back, and then focus on our in-service when we bring in members of the community or do things. We could look at something like that a little bit more in depth. Councilmember Cunningham.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate it. That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Cano. And thank you for this presentation. I think a lot of this training seems like it holds a lot of promise, and I know that there are things that are really good, and some of them you can easily measure, did it work? You either know how to use Narcan or you don't at the end of the training. Some of them are much more about adopting a culture and a mindset and an approach to this work that I could imagine going one of two ways, right? Many of us have probably had the experience of going to a mandatory training that you kind of roll your eyes at and sit in the back of the classroom and then go out and completely try to forget everything that you just learned. We've also probably all experienced some good trainings where we went in and really got something out of it. And so I have this picture in my head, and especially I think it's hard because when we've seen some high-profile incidents where a lot of the community has watched the body cam footage, we see behaviors that are very contradictory to these trainings sometimes, right? We've seen people jumping out of a car, yelling and swearing at someone in a really aggressive way that feels escalatory rather than de-escalatory. And when we've asked about that, we've been told that's how they were trained. They were trained to That's how you take command of a situation. That's what they've been told people will respond to. And so that feels really hard to integrate if you were trained that way in the beginning, and now you're being trained in de-escalatory tactics. And I guess my question is, what's the sense of the extent to which people are adopting this new way of doing things? How many people on the force today feel like they're resisting this and clinging to an old way of doing things that we know is something that we know that there are some people defending old practices and the ways that they were trained. And how is that impacting young people who were investing in them coming through this program and getting this training when they get into a squad car with someone who's resistant to de-escalation training, who's resistant to procedural justice, who's resistant to implicit bias training, and who says, forget everything they told you, kid, this isn't how it works, and that's the person you're riding with. How are we safeguarding against the preservation of the culture that we're trying to replace with a new approach and a new vision? And how do we measure whether it's working?
So I think it would be, Councilmember Fletcher, I think it would be hard to put a percentage on that, but what we started with was the leadership courses, and then we grabbed the recruits and cadets in the academy, and then field training and in-service. We're trying to change that culture from top down, bottom up. And the only thing for as far as training goes is the after action reviews on some of them that we do daily, and then later to see what they took from training and then what they learned from it a month later, letting us know how they applied it and techniques like that. I think you're always going to have an officer or two maybe with a bad attitude, had a bad day, but that would be hard to measure at what point in their career. That's why we're trying to offer more the mental health or wellness resources just on the stress and things like that that get to police officers on a day-to-day basis at times.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, that's a great question. I'm a firm believer that what you permit, you promote. And so a lot of this is changing culture in the sense that, for example, we will have folks reviewing body-worn camera footage of certain incidents where an officer could have legally, justifiably used force, but they didn't. We want to promote that. We want to use that as an example of good police work. Another thing, again, I go back to supervision. making sure that the wonderful training that Commander Blackwell teams are giving for these new recruits and cadets, and even our CSOs, that they're supported. They have to be supported out there. You're absolutely right. That was part of my culture coming on, that kid, forget what you learned in the academy. This is how we do things out here, and we have to break that cycle. Very important that our FTOs are selected based upon having a true belief in this mindset of procedural justice. Very important that, again, those supervisors on those shifts are promoting what we want in terms of the character of those men and women out there. So while absolutely there's going to be people who will resist, we have to make sure that is brought to our attention, and we have to provide support mechanisms around our folks so that they feel supported in doing the right thing. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess one other thing that I'm wondering in terms of the training curriculum is, how much do people learn about our city? We know that most officers, a vast majority of officers, don't live in the city anymore. And we have definitely seen cases where officers seem to publicly and vocally disagree with policies and laws that are passed by this council. And it feels like there's a real separation. I've also seen instances where people are trying to do the right thing and don't know that they ought to be reaching out to Public Works if they're trying to solve a traffic problem, or ought to be reaching out to business licensing if they're trying to work with a business. And so we see officers who don't seem to feel integrated into the rest of the city enterprise. So it's great, Chief Arredondo, that you're in relationship with a lot of the department heads and doing more collaborative work in that way. But that needs to be part of the culture of the city. So I guess I'm wondering, how much do you feel like officers know about how our city works, why we're doing the things we're doing, and who they could talk to about the things where they're running up against the work of other departments and of the rest of the city enterprise? Do they feel like a part of things?
I will say, if you could just take 2 minutes to respond. We have other questions from Councilmember Gordon, Councilmember Palmisano, and it's already 12:20. Thank you.
So that's a great question, Councilmember Fletcher. I think we really hone in on that in the Leadership Academy with the different aspects, bring actual community members to those, and then incorporating them throughout. I think we could probably evolve a little bit, maybe a little bit more in the academies, and it's a great question. So I would say that when they come in and they're being hired on, I think, I won't speak for the chief here, but I think that they ask a lot of questions about what you know about the city. A lot of them come prepared, knowing a lot about it. We touch on it briefly in the academy, just about the demographics, the makeup of city of Minneapolis, but we can always do better.
Councilmember Gordon.
I'll be really brief. I guess there's three things that I just wanted to highlight, and one really quick question. I really appreciated the youth development coming up. That's come up a lot on the Youth Coordinating Board and with our Youth Congress, and just officers have a better understanding of youth development. I also met with a hospice nurse recently and talked about how training in terms of dealing with people with dementia could be really helpful. There's simple things you can do, like get in somebody's eye contact before you expect them to know you're there and understand if you're older and you're suffering from dementia, and so that could perhaps be incorporated. I also don't believe that we do this, and I still think we should explore the idea of looking at implicit bias training, kind of building off Councilmember Fletcher saying, how do we know if the training has any input effect? I know we're doing the training, but then what about implicit bias testing to find out if it actually worked and if there's some bias? And I think there are organizations and academics that are developing better ways to kind of test that implicit bias now than we ever had before. But with those comments, and you don't have to answer them because I know we're short on time, but I also am curious, there's been some discussion about, can we influence trainings that officers take when they're off duty on their free time? And do we have any authority to have any influence and say you may not take that kind of training or go to that kind of conference on your free time?
So, Madam Chair, Council Member, that's a great question. Generally, how that works is, if we as a training unit push out a training announcement, that training comes through, that training request will come through us and then up to the chief's office where we approve it. Other training, if they're doing it on their off-duty time, although some of it is against policy, we wouldn't know it unless they brought training records to our training unit. So I can't oversee like all of training, or all 888 cops or civilians that go to every single training session out there. So that would be hard to gauge that.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, we specifically, at least, because as Commander Blackwell mentioned, there's folks could take off-duty Spanish lessons or first aid, but more recently, we've specifically been focused on any types of training where it's use of force or deadly force training, and so that is kind of where, but we still allow our employees to off-duty, again, Spanish immersion classes or more first aid classes, those types of things, and so we really just want to make sure that any training our employees are taking outside of their normal scope of their duties, that it comports with and complies with our values and our policies.
So you can restrict the training, and you do? Off-duty, free time?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, so most recently, so it's I guess it's yes or no. I mean, there's trainings that we want our folks to take on their own time, but the ones that I'm most focused on right now, and has come to our attention, is certainly the use of force and deadly force, because those are obviously so impactful and significant.
And so we would limit that. If somebody wanted to take a training, you would review it and approve it before they could take it?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, absolutely. We would want those employees to bring forward that training notice or curriculum through the training unit, through Commander Blackwell's team, for them to take a review to take a, does this comport with and comply with what we are teaching here as a procedurally just police department? And if it's not, to let them know that.
And if they took the training anyway, there would be consequences?
Yes, there would, Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano, you're good? All right. Do we have, okay, looks like we don't have any more questions, and I'm just a little sensitive with the time here. So I wanted to just thank everyone for being so patient and participating in this conversation, for you and your leadership and coming forward with the information that we're seeking, and I'm sure we'll be in touch for the upcoming Public Safety Committee meetings. Appreciate you, and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. City Council.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so we shall receive and file the presentation from the MPD on vision and culture change. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Without further business before us, we are adjourned. Thank you.
What was nice to see you.